Mare Cognitum by Norse Pony, Part 1. It was the sort of stupid, petty sibling fight where you not only thought of what had to be the perfect rejoinder 2 hours after the fact, but had to immediately seek out the other combatant. The ideal comeback had to be delivered personally. Plus, it clearly wasn't an idiotic attempt to extend the battle if the final verbal strike would allow Celestia to win. Perhaps it would have been possible to blame the national budget. Celestia wasn't necessarily bad at math. Anymore. It just didn't come naturally to her. She treated the world of numbers as a sort of foreign language for which a single stray diphthong altered entire paragraphs. It could be studied, and it was possible to gain some degree of skill. But the older sibling was constantly on guard for the one stray integer which would turn numerical diplomacy into all-out accounting war. Luna, by contrast, was naturally fluent. She could casually dive into tides of imaginary numbers and come out surfing on fractals. She also didn't seem to understand how utterly annoying that was. And when it came to writing out that winter's initial draft for the nation's budget, Celestia felt that experience meant something. An extra 10 centuries of figuring out where the money needed to go. That had to provide some degree of benefit. And Luna had been abeyance. She hadn't been present for the founding of what had to be 80% of the current programs. The younger hadn't gone through the circumstances which had created them, didn't recognize how necessary they were. The elder felt it was around 80%, verifying that would require asking some pony, and that some pony would absolutely not be Luna. There would presumably be a day when having the younger sister correct her work would not be fundamentally irritating, and after nearly 13 centuries of life, it wasn't getting any closer. They'd been working on the budget. Celestia had tried to explain it. Luna simply insisted on doing what she described as fixing it. And there were ways in which they were both right, but it was that kind of argument. 4 hours of calculus-hosted misery had brought them to the point where neither was about to give over so much as a main strand's width. They'd called it quits for the cycle because that was slightly easier than declaring war, left the debate room by separate exits, and then Luna had called back one final select sentence over a star-streaming tale. Celestia had fumed for 2 hours. Then she'd thought of a comeback. And since she was almost completely certain of just where her sister would be, she'd been right. Of course she was right. She was right about the budget, and now she'd been just as perceptive about this as well. The elder had doubly won. And she delivered her perfect sentence, the ideal phrase, what had to be a comet collapsing comeback into the acoustics provided by marble walls and gently rippling water, and a room the size of a pool. It had been perfect. And Luna was just looking at her, placidly, with a starscape of mane and tail fully stable, not reacting at all. Well, technically, she did drift slightly to the left, but that was probably just the current. Truly, the younger finally asked. It took some voice projection for the casual inquiry to fully reach Celestia, and the snidness lost nothing from the voyage to a distant shore. Some 2 hours since we parted, and that was the best you could do. Celestia fumed. Do you mind, sister? Luna sharply called out. It takes a considerable amount of time to fill this. Just as much would be required to refill it, and only one of us is comfortable when standing within the lesser form of liquid fire. The elder tried to glare at her sibling, found the lightly bobbing dark blue form becoming indistinct in fast-rising mist. It took several deep breaths to get it all under control, but the temperature began to drop, and water condensed on marble walls. She'd been fuming, and done so in such a manner as to turn their immediate vicinity into a sauna. Any humidity which came into contact with that level of frustration tended to become steam. She hadn't noticed the heat. She almost never did. Eventually, the younger shrugged. Dense, soaked fur rubbed against itself, and a few droplets were squeezed out. So if that was truly your final volley, Luna said, Then I would ask you to leave me to my bath. We can resume this on the next cycle. Perhaps by then you would be willing to admit that I am right. We could do this here, Celestia tightly declared. I can stay up for a while. It was winter, and the solar shift was technically somewhat shorter, not that it usually mattered. I am bathing. Words which weren't quite as calm, and the elder spotted a new potential angle of attack. You could get out. I am bathing. And now there were tiny needles of ice floating in the water. In terms of visibility, breaking Luna's calm, this represented significant progress. For what? Celestia inquired, and managed to get her tones into the lit of false tease. The last 2 hours, and you still don't feel clean? Maybe that's because you know you're in the wrong about that last cut. Maybe you just can't admit it, but the guilt just won't wash away. Luna glared at her. Celestia gently smiled. The water tried to ripple, and found itself having to cross miniature flows. The undertides would probably take care of those. The room was the size of a pool because that was how Luna bathed. She used water in tremendous quantities, to the point where the palace's current plumbing solution for the massive draw was tapping into a nearby lake. It was possible to host games, swimming events in Luna's bath. However, the trials would have to be held somewhere else, because the least skilled amateurs would never be able to cross the distance without tiring. The room was marble, because so much of the palace was marble. Water dripped oddly from marble, added irregular punctuation marks to any argument. The pool was sunken, and even with the strength of stone in play, it had taken some major engineering feats to make sure everything could take the weight. And Luna was just floating there, because a stressful night could leave her floating for hours. Eventually, she would drift beneath the raised curving tubes of metal and trigger a rinsing spray, although most ponies might have described it as a four-hose deluge. She might consider getting out after that. Might. Sister, Luna finally said, this may be a question of perspective. Yes, Celestia replied, careful to keep her voice light. You can't see that you're wrong. Silence. Water dripped. Some of it froze to the walls. It was rare to win a moment of silence from Luna. The elder was starting to feel as if she was on the right track. Perhaps, if we both rest, the younger decided, recover. A process which, of course, takes a full cycle of sun and moon. We can resume after. If you stay in there much longer, Celestia told her, you're going to turn into a sea pony. Luna's expression was calm again, but the half-tangible tail lashed, and the water wasn't quite sure how to react. Over, under, through? Sea ponies do not exist, Luna eventually stated. We looked. There's a certain issue searching for very long, Celestia reminded her. Fatal ones. Yes, the younger finally admitted. Breathing spells were not particularly advanced at the time, and the modern knights still have difficulties in dealing with the pressure of the depths. Regardless, I feel the mythical realm of Shiabu will continue to remain exactly that. Tia, it has been a rather long day, and given how we were debating the budget, day is exactly the word I intended. May we please? They were sisters. They loved each other, often in spite of everything, sometimes because of it. But they fought, because that was what siblings did, even after so much time. Perhaps especially after so much time, when true harmony meant that there should never be a final victory. The elder recognized that, deep down. She knew that her sibling was tired, and that it would be better to start over at another time. Perhaps there was even something in her which recognized that on a few of the budgetary issues, her sister had located legitimate points, every one of which had only felt everything like a stab. They loved each other, in spite of, because of. The love was still there, but the chasm of perspective could be impossible to cross. Locked within their own skulls for a lifetime, and when those lives had gone on for so very long, the locks could feel endlessly heavy. They loved each other. She did her best to remember that. But emotion wasn't comprehension. On some level, she recognized all of it, but it had been a very long day, and she wanted a win. Why do you do that? It wasn't so much an extended silence as a rather long pause. I am trying to define that, Luna finally announced, drifting slightly left and bumping into a tiny iceberg, a process which will require some time, unless you care to do it for me. Why do you take to the water so much? Celestia asked. Hardly any pony spends this much time in water. Even ponies with marks for sailing stay over it, and swimmers get out sometime. Ponies aren't naturally meant for water, Luna, so why a giant bath? Why hours of soaking and... Her head tilted several times, allowing the horn to serve as pointer. Rinse tubes, the giant inlets, drains which had required 2 drawers for all the filed patents. A final pair of head sweeps indicated the full length and breadth of the pool. This required some significant neck movement and a touch of muscle strain. This. Silence again, but a different kind. Luna's features scrunched with careful thought, and more water fell away. Celestia watched. The pool was sunken, and that made it easy to look down on her sister, even easier than usual. Natural connection, the younger concluded, and almost smiled. The elder thought that over. Twisting pastels shifted into each other, hues blurring across the fuzzed border of confusion. What? Being immersed within water, Luna steadily voiced, is much like being immersed within night, and as I am rain to one. She did smile, a calm, rather relaxed specimen, one which declared that as far as she was concerned, she just answered everything. Water like night? So if you remain submerged within either for too long, you drown? But she didn't say it, because there were words which should never be part of any little fight, and she knew that to remain internally under sun, without change or respite, would be to have her soul burn. And Luna seemed to feel she'd solved the impromptu, half-unintended riddle. Celestia was thinking about it, turning the words over in her head again and again as the younger watched. The lathe of thought wasn't smoothing away the edges, and... I don't understand. Which made it feel very much like Luna had just won, and in turn, that meant Celestia had lost. Again. Celestia wearily shook her head. The pastel flows slowed their pace, came to a stop, and the elder sister shifted all 4 legs, forced her wings to remain at the rest position, and turned away, began to walk towards the exit, ending what had indeed been a very long day. I suppose if I actually understood that, she wearily said, I would be that much closer to understanding you. There was a sound from behind her. It was a little like a spontaneous 6-limbed body spasm and jerk, a lot like water being displaced in all directions, and just slightly like a soft gasp. The gasp was mostly audible in retrospect. Truly? She also missed the tone of it on first hearing, that half-desperate note of hope. Yes, Celestia replied, not really paying attention to the word, and left.